Well, now that Jodie's ruined the surprise endings in my story, we can start back where it all started. It was back in '93 when I became a paraplegic. I was literally living the dream in those days. I'd grown up in Tasmania and moved to Sydney just to try and find myself. I didn't have any real specific goals at that time other than I just wanted to get out and enjoy life and get as much fulfilment out of it as I possibly could. I loved going out and enjoying the nightclubs and bars, and finally realised that it would probably be better if I actually worked in the bars and I could still be there and actually start making some money instead of just losing all my money. And also working in bars allowed me to work nights and have my days free to pursue sporting endeavours that I was into at the time. I loved doing triathlon. I was an avid scuba diver. My big passion was motorsport. In those days I was racing motorbikes, and I just completed Wayne Gardner's masterclass in road racing in February 1993, and I was also doing some part-time modelling and basically just, like I said, living the dream that any person at 26 years of age would love to live. After the Wayne Gardner School, I managed to make some really good contacts in the motorsport industry, especially motorbikes with Honda, who obviously Wayne Gardner was sponsored by, and they came out to the actual classes and watched us on the track, and through that I managed to get a test drive on one of their 600 Supersport bikes. That went extremely well, and we teamed up with some people that we knew in the local Channel 10, and between Channel 10 and Honda we managed to get a sponsorship deal together for me to actually start competing on a national level and do the 1993 600 Supersport Championship. I'd been up to Gosford the day before the accident and negotiated a deal to actually get the championship winning bike from the year before, so I was in very, very good stead to actually do very well in the championship. So the next day I went up to Gosford, picked up the bike, put it in a mate's garage. We had a test session, that was on a Thursday. We had the first test session on the Saturday. And went to work that night, extremely excited about all the prospects that were happening. Gave my mum a call. Guess what? I've finally got the sponsorship deal that I've been looking for, and was extremely excited about that. The nightclub I was working at the time was a club called Rogues. Paul actually sat behind me while I was talking about all the things I'm not going to tell you that we used to get up to when I was working at Rogues. But I'm sure Paul will tell you after a few drinks a little bit later on.
Is that Rogues in Brisbane?
Rogues in Sydney. In Sydney, yeah. On Oxford Street there. And what...
Similar stories.
Yeah. And what made Rogues the best nightclub in Sydney wasn't where it was or what it was, but the actual people that we used to let in. So it was full of rock stars and models, and you basically had to know either myself or the girl that worked on the front desk, Maria, to get into the club. We'd basically have everyone lined up, and then we'd just walk up and down the line up outside and go, yep, you can come in, you can come in, you can come in. Sorry guys, you guys will have to wait until a little bit later. So for 3 nights previous to that, I used to have a road bike at the time. I used to ride to and from work on my motorbike. And Maria had sort of come to me at the end of the night and said, oh, how about a ride on the back of your bike after work? And I said, well, I never carry a spare helmet, and I'm not going to get on a bike without a helmet, and I'm certainly not taking you on a bike without a helmet, so sorry, forget about it. And on this particular Thursday night, someone had actually left a helmet in the cloakroom, and Maria came to me at the end of the night with this helmet and said, look, I've got a helmet, how about that ride? And I just signed the sponsorship deal. A bit of a cruise after work would be the perfect way to unwind. So I said, yep, no problems at all. So instead of heading north to Balgala, over near Manly where I lived, we headed south down to Bondi, and it was in March, beautiful warm evening, nice road conditions. So instead of going the main highway, the main traffic way down to Bondi, we went the back way up past the Watsons Bay Navy base, up the Rose Bay S's there, so you could get a feel of what a bike felt like going through the corners. Went past Watsons Bay, got onto Military Road, which is a back road going down into Bondi, very wide road, probably about 5 cars wide. And we just got onto the straight, absolutely nothing to be concerned about. There's a slight crest in the road. Any cars coming the other way at that time of night, I would have seen the loom of their headlights, no problems at all. I'd actually slowed down and turned around to Maria and said, you okay back there? Yep, no problems at all. So fine, turned around, went up through the gears, probably doing 70, maybe 80 at that time of night. And just as I came to the crest, on the left-hand side of the road there was a car that looked like it was parked on the wrong side of the road. So instead of seeing tail lights, I saw the reflection of the bike headlights in its headlights. And I was just in the process of going, that's weird, that car's parked facing the wrong direction. What I didn't realise was there'd been a young guy down in Bondi drinking all night who was actually stationed up at Watson's Bay Navy Base. He'd actually tried to jump in his car drunk and sneak home the back way. Now, whether he didn't have his headlights on deliberately because he thought he might be a bit sneakier without headlights, or he was just too drunk to have them on, I'll never really know. But as we came up to the crest, as I was thinking about this car, it literally launched straight out in front of us. And it wasn't actually parked on the wrong side of the road. It was just that absolute split-second instant where it was impacting the gutter on my side of the road. And so as I came up over the crest, it bounced off and came straight out in front of us. I had about enough time to go, what the... And then the last thing I remember is making impact with the car and then waking up face down in the gutter about 5 or 10 minutes later. Now, when you're racing motorbikes, the first thing that they told me, the very first practice session that I did, one of the guys came up who was an A grader and said, "Oh, Matt, good to see you out here. You know, your bike looks great. 2 things are going to happen in your motorbike career that are absolute definite." I was like, "Oh, what's that?" And he said, 1, you're going to fall off, and 2, it's going to hurt like a bastard when you do, so be prepared for it. When you fall off, if you get knocked out, make sure before you jump up and start running after the bike, which is the natural instinct, make sure first of all that you've stopped, because a lot of times on motorbikes and racing bikes you'll come into a corner 200, 250 kilometres an hour, hit the brakes, lose the front end, knock yourself out. When you wake up, you're still probably doing up to 100, 180 kilometres an hour sliding down the road in your leathers. And that's what the leathers are designed for, and that's why, you know, it's reasonably safe riding motorbikes on a race track. So first thing I did was shook it off a little bit and went, oh my God, you know, that was bad. And for some reason, when you break bones, especially in motorbike accidents, you always seem to get the taste of tarmac in your mouth. I don't know whether that's just me or something in my body, but I had that taste in my mouth. I knew I'd broken something. So first of all, I just laid there. My head was sort of facing over to my left arm, and first of all I sort of just moved fingers and hands first, and everything seemed to work. So a little bit of optimism came into my system. I thought, oh, maybe it's not quite as bad as what I first thought. So the first thing I went to do was to move this arm. When I meant to move this arm, this part of my arm moved up and down, and my whole forearm just stayed flat on the ground. And you can imagine the wave of nausea that goes through you when you see something like that. So I managed to get my head turned to the other side and then very gingerly move this elbow, and the whole elbow joint moved. So I thought, wow, this could be, you know, might be as bad as I thought. So I went to lift my whole arm up. This time, from about mid-forearm forward, stayed flat on the ground, and it just flopped up and down. It was basically my forearm was a bag of broken bones. So I was like, right, okay, I've got 2 broken arms. And then went to move my feet and my toes, and realised instantly I had absolutely no feeling or movement in my legs whatsoever. Being a motorbike rider, you kind of knew that that was the most prevalent and at the highest risk of spinal cord injury. So we knew about spinal cord injury. We used to actually sit around and talk about it. What would you do if you ended up in a wheelchair? We were all bravado in those days. Oh, I'd rather be dead than in a wheelchair. And that was the attitude that we sort of went into this with. At about that time I heard people milling around, and I managed to get someone's attention, because when I'd come off I'd smack my face into the road pretty hard. Fortunately I was wearing a full face helmet. If I wasn't, I wouldn't be here talking to you today. I basically wouldn't have a facelift. So thankfully the full face helmet saved my life, but I was bleeding quite profusely through my nose, and it was starting to fill up the chin guard of my helmet, and I could feel it up near my lips. So I managed to get someone to get my helmet off so I could breathe properly. And that was when the real tragedy of the situation became apparent to me. Maria had actually come through the accident with me, and because I didn't have feeling in my legs, I didn't feel that she was actually laying across my legs. I was face down in the gutter was coming through my chest, my legs were up on the footpath, and that's where Maria was as well. And the first thing I heard was Maria trying to breathe with a punctured lung. And I don't know if anyone's ever heard that sound before, but it is the most horrifying gurgling sound you'll ever hear, and that haunts me to this day. Unfortunately, there was another accident that particular night on the other side of Sydney. A young guy had done a runner from the police, and there was 4 police cars in an accident, and a young female constable had been hurt. So all the ambulances, although there was an ambulance station only a minute away down in Bondi, all those ambulances were over in Western Sydney. So it took nearly 45 minutes for an ambulance to actually get there. Unfortunately, Maria had suffered very bad injuries and actually had ruptured her femoral artery, and all the blood that I was looking at in the gutter wasn't all mine, but the majority of it was hers. So we got loaded into the ambulance. Maria went to one hospital, I went to another, and unfortunately Maria didn't actually make it to her hospital. She actually passed away in the ambulance on the way there. And the next thing I remember is waking up in a hospital bed. The very first thing I did was look up, and right above my head was the race number that I'd fought so hard to get number 6 for the championship. Here I am in intensive care bed number 6. The irony wasn't lost on me, and I could feel a wry smile even with the injuries that I had. But the horrifying thing was having all my family standing around me from Hobart that I had no idea why. I was like, oh my God, what's everyone doing here? And for the next week or so in that intensive care bed, basically I was more concerned about trying to get everyone out of the hospital room, like trying to find things for my parents to go and do, and just try and cope and come to terms with everything that had happened. A couple of weeks later I got moved down to another hospital in an actual spinal unit, and it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks later, and that particular spinal unit, they used to make everyone leave, so you didn't have any visitors before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, so you had that morning period just to sort of get yourself awake and come to terms with the day sort of thing. And I was sitting there one day and it all started to come to me what I'd lost. There was going to be no more triathlons, no more road racing, no more motorbikes, no more modelling, no more managing nightclubs. And it all started to well up, and I started to fall. I could feel myself falling into that depression. And while I was doing that, for some reason I kind of looked over to my right, and there was a young guy about 18 years of age. He was a tourist from England actually, and he dove into the water at one of the beaches, and I'd done it myself surfing down at Bondi. You'd sort of stride out and do a cool dive into the water. I did it one day and dove straight into a sandbar and ripped all the skin off my face and had to quickly paddle out and come up with a cool story of what happened. But this poor young guy had actually broken his neck quite high, and all he had left was the ability to breathe, which doesn't sound like much, but that ability to breathe would allow him to use a blow tube. 1 blow for go, 2 blows for stop, and he could actually use, they were teaching him how to use an electric wheelchair with a blow tube. And watching that, my depression started to lift, and I looked down at my hands, and they'd done some pretty amazing surgery by that point on my arms, and everything was looking pretty good on that front. So at that point I realised that things could have been a hell of a lot worse, and that I was just going to try. I was just going to go out and I was going to try.